I just love feeding that curiosity and wondering the biggest questions of our existence, like what happens to me after I die. In a weird sense, that question of ghosts, like what happens to me after I die, I kind of already have, in a sense, part of an answer. Like I'm in a weird way kind of very connected to death through my heart already.
Welcome to The Second Act, a New Donor Alliance monthly video series introducing you to interesting people with really interesting stories. Now, they each come, of course, with their own unique background, their own unique story, but they all do have one thing in common, and that's their connection in one way or another to organ and tissue donation and transplantation. I'll be your host. My name is Brianna DiPilato, and I am really excited to introduce you to our first guest, Connor Randall from Arvada, Colorado. Now, if you're into ghost hunting, paranormal activity, maybe you're into state government or state politics, or maybe you really like punk rock music, you're going to love this interview. So without further ado, let's get to know Connor. Here he is in our first video of the Second Act series.
I am a intensely curious, passionate by the paranormal person who wants to hear and tell these really strange stories. And in that, I'm able to sort of do what I love, and I'm able to live the life that I love, which is spending a lot of time with my family, with my drums, with my dogs, because of the gift of life that I received when I was a young child.
Let's start at the beginning then. When you were a child, going through your childhood, did you ever think that everything that has happened from then until now, are you 29?
Yeah, 29.
What was going through your mind? What were your dreams? What were your aspirations? And then how did your health kind of play into that?
When I was born with a heart defect and basically cardiomyopathy. My heart wasn't growing with me. And so I had to have a heart transplant before I could even remember anything. I grew up knowing that there was something different about my health, but it wasn't affecting my everyday life. When I was a little kid, the biggest thing that was different for me was that I loved basketball and Space Jam in the late 90s, like every other little boy who was in elementary school at that age. And one time when I was in elementary school, the Make-A-Wish people came knocking at my door and asked who I want to meet. And in that moment, I wanted to meet Michael Jordan. So I had this whole thing with Michael Jordan. And in a sense, that's what made me feel different from my peers, even more than the heart transplant stuff. Because I lived my life just like anybody else. And that's what I think a lot of people don't realize is I was a little kid who received an organ transplant and didn't even really have to pay attention to it because I was able to live a normal life because of that amazingness there.
And it led to eventually you needing another heart transplant, right?
When I was basically heading into middle school age, I started to run into some difficulties breathing. I fainted a couple of times, and they found out that my heart was starting to reject. So basically my body was attacking my heart, and I started to run into these difficulties. I was 11 and 12 years old when I spent tons of time in the hospital, tons of time around doctors. And basically got to a point where I had nurses at home with me. And when I wasn't at the hospital, I was constantly having difficulty getting around. I was bloated. I was feeling sick all the time. And they said, this is getting worse and worse. We're going to put you back on the list for a heart transplant. And I received another transplant when I was 13 years old after being on the list for over a year. And that was the summer of 2005. So growing up in the mid 2000s was hard for me, and it was different. And it was when a lot of that reality of what I had gone through as a child set in. And I sort of saw it myself. And, it's hard when you're a little kid trying to face this almost like mortality, basically. And so I'm totally good to go. And it's now I just appreciate life so much more. So it's like, just do I'm just going to do what I want to do now.
Is it better up here? Are you a different spirit up here?
When did like ghosts and paranormal activity and all of that come into play? You know, these special gifts that you've been given have allowed you to do exactly that, explore some of these different interests that you have. So when did that interest take hold? And tell us a little bit about your life within that space.
It was actually, oddly enough, it was like when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, when I was like at first sick and then I was recovering, a show called Ghost Hunters came out, and I got really into that TV show, and basically would like gather up my friends and take a video camera and pretend like we were ghost hunters and go to like the abandoned houses in town, or go to crazy. In Colorado, we're lucky because we have the Stanley Hotel, which was like always been an hour away from me. So if I could convince my parents to take me up there, we would spend some nights at the Stanley Hotel just wandering around, probably places that we weren't supposed to go, just like finding strange stories and like hearing people talk about ghosts and looking for ghosts ourselves and pretending like we were ghost hunters. And basically, I just kind of never stopped doing that.
So I've had some folks reach out to the Donate Life Colorado properties and say, hey, isn't that guy in one of those pictures, isn't he from Hellier? So tell us, what is that? Where did that start and where is that going?
So the basic synopsis of a show that I'm in and helped produce and create, it's called Hellier, and it's on Amazon Prime. It is a currently 15 episode series, but basically what happened was my friend Greg Newkirk, who a lot of people know from either the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult, or he also runs a website with his wife called Planet Weird and Weekend Weird, and sort of like paranormal blogger, like internet personality who makes some appearances on TV shows and stuff as well. Fantastic guy. He received a really strange email in 2012. And the email was from a man in rural Kentucky. And Greg received this email, which basically said, hey, my family and I are nearly every night being besieged by these little extraterrestrial creatures that are coming out of the woods behind my property. And they are tapping on our windows. They're tearing apart things in my yard. Nobody believes me. I've tried calling the police. I have pictures, something's happening here. And Greg, of course, was like, well, this is interesting. Gets a hold of this guy who said his name was David, and is in contact with David back and forth for a few months. Then David sends him pictures of all these footprints, pictures of the beings, goes into detail about everything that's happening around his property. And just when Greg says, okay, I'm going to like come out to your house and look at this, David just disappeared off the face of the earth. And so the question was, is this a hoax? Am I being hoaxed? Who's faking this? Or is this really happening? Basically, the series is sort of like a paranormal catfish, where we are trying to find David or the person behind these emails, and we're also trying to find out the truth behind the creatures themselves, and end up going to Kentucky, spending a lot of time there, and discovering all sorts of really bizarre related stories as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
So where do you find the time then to be also a musician in a Denver-based punk band?
Back in the day, my friends in high school and I started a band, and we've now been playing together for just over 10 years. And I picked up the drums and sort of like found a lot of, in a weird way, like relaxation in playing really fast, like hardcore drums sometimes. It just sort of like emptied my brain. So I like started picking it up more and more. And then we went out and we recorded a couple of records. And yeah, have had a lot of fun just sort of like in the local community, either opening up for punk bands when they come through, or like playing venues like the Gothic or Bluebird ourselves. Just having a lot of fun with our friends, just playing music. So yeah, it's called the Ghoulies, We've released a few albums. The latest one is called Midnight in America, and that's on like Spotify and all over the place. So that's always been like a fun side thing that I've enjoyed as well.
So you have these hobbies, these interests that you've really honed in on, but it almost is like you live a double life in a way. So what's your day job?
What I do right now is I actually work as a clerk at the Colorado House of Representatives. So I'm down at the Colorado Capitol as a nonpartisan, just like I am one of the bill clerks. So I handle the amending of the bills. A lot of people will notice me if they're like touring around the Capitol. They'll hear my voice. I do like the roll call and the vote counts and various things like that. So yeah, for a few months a year, I just sort of like live this political West Wing life.
Do you ever sit and think, maybe as you're playing your drums, as you're kind of working on this show, maybe not right in the moment, but do you ever look back and think, wow, all of this happened in ways that I can't explain, and I'm here because of an amazing gift? Do you ever let the gravity of that kind of fill your head and think about it at all?
It happens to me a lot of times when I'm just like sitting, having moments to myself. Everybody, if I'm like running or, like just finished like a workout or something like that, and I'm like, looking at the pulse just like so many other people do, I always have this other thought where it's like, this is my heart now, but this is not the heart that I was born with. This is a gift heart. And that's a really bizarre thing to think about. It makes you like even that much more grateful for the life that you're living right now.
So what would you say to maybe those that are watching and are wondering now about what organ, eye, and tissue donation is, or, oh man, I didn't sign up, should I?
We kind of have to sit back and realize that we never know what's going to happen to us. And that's like a hard reality, I think, to face. But I think at some point we all have to sit down, and you could be the healthiest person in the world and have a tragedy happen. Like, that's part of the reality of living. The person that I received my heart from was a 21-year-old male. And I'm grateful that it was on his mind that he said yes when he was asked at the DMV if he should be an organ donor, because I wouldn't be here if he didn't say yes. The reality, in sort of a weirdly harsh way, is that we could walk across the street and get hit by a bus. Like, that could happen to anybody. And at some point you need to ask yourself, if that happens to me, do I want to be able to help people in my death? And do I want to be able to help people in the future as well? And it's so easy to just say yes to that and to get on the registry. You can never hope for like a tragedy to happen, but you know that in the reality of living that it does. But good can come of that. And people who are organ recipients like me are like good examples of that.